far side of the moon, in a forgotten corner, but across all dimensions, with the exception of exactly 13, there exists a being, the Void Rider. It does not see with eyes. It does not hear with ears. It remembers, through all possible timelines, through realities that never bloomed and futures that never end. It witnesses the uprising of life, the emergence of hope, and its inevitable extinction. This is one of those stories, a story of humanity as it happened in one of its countless realities. The Void Rider was witness, as always, as in every variant, as in every end. As in every end. The Twisted One got up, shook the snail dust from its many limbs, and followed the gray mutant into the wasteland. An elusive signal was all this world had left for him to believe in.
Chapter 1, A Hollow Awakening. The ground was warm and mushy, like half-cooked flesh. High above, the sky pulsed in a dull yellow and lacked a visible sun. Nothing moved, yet everything seemed in motion. Faint vibrations beneath the surface, as if the ground itself was breathing. He did not wake from sleep, or at least, it did not feel like sleep. A silent, crushing static was everything he remembered. The remnants of his left forearm were fused with an ancient device. Metal housing, a faint CRT flickering with colors not meant for eyes, held together by cartilage, exhaling data. After inestimable time, he gave in to the ticking in his nervous system, and so he lifted his mutated body from the ground, untangling his limbs. His mind was dripping like sap, swirling around the analog data. Every part of his being was decoding the device's stream. Finally, he felt a sensation, a direction, and his full body rose. Beneath him once had been a road, a scar torn by endless lines of forgotten machines, echo of movement that once was a heartbeat. The twisted oak took the first step, and then a second, starting a journey into the carcass of a world long past its ending.
dark side of the moon, I remember. A figure drags itself across the wasteland, carrying an ancient burden. Some say it walks to flee. Some say it walks to protect. Echoes of civilizations in air thick with snail dust. Cowards without will, clinging to the shells of giants. An alien encounter bound to a price paid in fear, smearing the signal all over the snail-born.
Chapter 2. The Slithering Villages. The Twisted One had followed the device's signal for months. It nested in his nerves, seeding thoughts and impulse. Days measured in dust and steps along the sediment of history, oblivion and downfall lining up to form the landscape. Then, just after he had crossed the wide salty plains, humongous snails appeared like mountains on the horizon. Deep drums mixed with unnatural voices sound like wet thunder. The signal had led him to the slithering villages of the snail-born. Walking across glassy slime and snail dust, he closed the distance. Smoke rose from the backs of these giants. Structures swayed hypnotically. Towers crooked and made from scrap, symbiotic in their decay. He stopped below a slithering village, strainedly staring upwards. Metal groaning, a platform made from scrap was lowered. Ancient drums in his ears, he stepped on, the signal rippling through his bones. The platform shivered him upward 1,000 feet into their realm. They faced each other in air saturated with smoke and fungus. Silent mutants clothed in hide, their faces hidden behind chitin, a culture rooted in fear and dependence on their slimy hosts. Never did they walk the ground or take decisions. No greeting, but food and hospitality. No closeness, but a connection formed by despair. They told him about a figure seen on the horizon not too long ago, grey scales and a shining coat dancing in the rancid winds. Since the day the herd was restless and 2 giants were lost, they panicked and fled from the stranger, taking the symbiotic villages with them. The Twisted One listened, but gave no promise. He could not help, nor carry the weight of their fear. The device pulsed, whispering of the figure in the coat. So he left the snail-born behind after learning what they knew.
dark side of the moon, I remember. A figure drags itself across the wasteland, carrying an ancient burden. Some say it walks to flee. Some say it walks to protect. Ahead, a vibration moves the atmosphere, a hum that thickens the air, that binds voices into one. Another encounter, born of a past fight to the death. A hive mind crumbling, already marked by the signal.
Chapter 3. The Hive Mind. The Twisted One and his signal ended up in regions of humming air, telepathic vibrations even visible in the dust. Blackened ground, thick with resin and crusty honey residues. Pyramids made from comb and wax, towering his perception. Each surface trembled with the collective voice, a low chorus that was neither speech nor melody. It thickened the air, seeping into his skin. The signal pulled him closer into the hum of Apis Ra. Shadows moved inside the pyramids. Figures emerged upright yet insectile. Their bodies a graft of man and bee. Eyes faceted, limbs coated in brittle chitin and wings. They stood around him in silence, but the silence was not empty. A voice entered him without words, pressed into his skull like a renaissance. "Sit down, wanderer. Share your jelly with us." The phrase repeated in many layers, the chorus collapsing into one command. He had no jelly, no part in their ritual, yet their eyes burned with expectation. He spat into the ritual bowl, and the world dissolved. For a moment he feared it was death. When he awoke, the hum was inside him. His thoughts not his alone anymore. The Apis Ra shared their history, their coming downfall. A scaled stranger had trespassed the hive. His coat shone in rancid winds, unwilling to leave, unable to hum. The swarm sharpened into war. 13,000 drones fell, and the hive's future with them. The Twisted One rose from the circle, honey dripping from his limbs, his mind scattered in fear of this powerful being. The hum inside him still trembled with grief and fury, yet it was not his. They offered him their golden cure, the last of their strength, but he felt only the ticking of the device, pulling him elsewhere. He left the hive behind, carrying their voices as an echo, and the signal as the only command.
side of the moon, I remember. A figure drags itself across the wasteland, carrying an ancient burden. Some say it walks to flee, some say it walks to protect. The wasteland swallows his steps, pulling him downward. Caves open like wounds in the skin of the earth. No sky, no horizon, only stone that remembers. The signal seeps into tunnels where the walls breathe.
Chapter 4. The Living Tunnels. The signal faded. The Twisted One hesitated for the first time. Then, the ground broke open beneath his feet, swallowing him into a throat of slimy soil. He landed in wet air, swallowed by a darkness that felt alive. The silence pressed deeper than the hum had ever reached. On the walls, faint carvings glimmered in the dim glow of lichen. Figures etched in stone, crude yet unmistakable. A scaled mutant, a coat, some kind of device or case. The Twisted One traced the lines with trembling tendrils, realizing this was the first image of the signal's source he had ever seen. From the crevices crawled figures small and pale, their skin thin as paper, born eyeless. The Twisted One remained still, his hand on the carved stone. They sought answers, demanded to know about the grey mutant, its burden, and why their tunnels are still trembling in fear and pain. His words were broken, fragmented at best. He knew nothing of burdens beyond his own. Still, the young ones leaned closer, as if his silence carried meaning. Through them he felt the tunnels breathing. Every wall was bone and memory, every inch a once living being. The old ones had not died, they had merged with the tunnels, their fears fueling the endless dark. They guided him through the labyrinth, following the trail of fear. For weeks he wandered in their company, deeper, then upward again. At last, a pale shaft of light pierced the dark, the tunnels opening into a gaping wound on the Earth's surface. Before him stretched a scar of steel and concrete, a chasm where mountains of a dead city leaned into ruins. The signal woke up faintly, calling him into Dead Gulch.
From the dark side of the moon I remember, a figure drags itself across the wasteland, carrying an ancient burden. Some say it walks to flee, some say it walks to protect. The final steps of his journey, Dead Gulch awaits.
Chapter 5, Dead Gulch. The wasteland split open into a gorge of concrete and rust. On one side, towers of a fallen megacity, fractured spires piercing the haze. On the other, the carcass of an orbital station, fallen from the sky and long forgotten, a graveyard carved by gravity and time. The Twisted One descended into its shadow. The signal was gone. He found remnants, a twisted corpse, its skin grey and scaled, 3 legs, 2 heads, a plastic coat, torn and weathered by storm and slime, a sealed steel case, scratched and covered with symbols that no tongue remembered, and bark, half rotten, but inscribed with the grey mutant's story. No glory, no goal, no power, only disease and visions of death. Snailborn who were scared, Apis Ra whose honey was his last hope. Paths that led to rejection, combat or silence. A device strapped to his back, as old as powerful, built in long forgotten times as a reset. I carry this burden not to be remembered. I carried it so that no one will open it, so that what is left of life itself on Earth may endure. These were the mutant's last written words. No witness to his death. The grey mutant's journey was over. His task unfulfilled. The Twisted One stood over the relics and understood fragments enough to decide. He tore the tracking device from his own left arm. The bone screamed as it left him, and the ticking died in an instant. The silence was final, yet it felt like release. He lifted the case onto his back, not as savior, not as conqueror, only as bearer of necessity. He walked through the shadows of Dead Gulch, beginning his journey to protect the ancient mechanism.
the dark side of the moon, I remember. A figure drags itself across the wasteland, carrying an ancient burden. Some say it walks to flee, some say it walks to protect.
Months, perhaps years later, Dead Gulch lay silent. Only the wind tore across the fractured orbital bones, howling through steel ribs like a choir of rust. From the haze emerged another being, half bird, half man, with owl-like wings and 3 human faces. At its hips, 2 revolvers of black iron. In the depths of Dead Gulch, it scavenged an ancient device. When its hand closed around it, the thing woke. A jolt, a scream, and then oblivion. A silent, crushing static was everything he remembered. The remnants of his left leg were fused with an ancient device. Metal housing, a faint CRT flickering with colors not meant for eyes, held together by cartilage, exhaling data. The gun-slinging birdman shook the snail dust from its wings and 3 faces, and followed the twisted one into the wasteland. An elusive signal was all this world had left for him to believe in.
The Void Rider was witness, as always, as in every variant, as in every end.